So I have some important questions about the federal government and how they relate to the state. One of the ones that I'm most concerned about is, as you know, you were just at the festival. Mississippi decided to go ahead and pass a medical cannabis program, and I've had a lot of people ask me about, their firearms. Are their Second Amendment rights going to be affected by this? There was recently, what was the bill that Stephen Palazzo voted against? Do you remember that?
No, I don't.
It was very recently. There was a bill in Congress to legalize marijuana at the federal level, and he voted against it. So, what's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts on the federal government's role in Mississippi and throughout other states?
That is a good question, and the answer is not so simple. So, the federal government has the right to take your firearms away if you get caught with cannabis. You still have to fill out the Federal Firearm Form Act whenever you buy a firearm from a dealership. Some states, including Mississippi, have protections for medical cannabis users. Then some states just don't check. It just depends on the state. But the federal government, if they find out about it, if they wanted to, they could come in and do raids, and that does happen. It just depends on the state and if they want to. I'd like to see cannabis removed from the controlled substance list once and for all. It's affecting banking. You're not allowed to put your money into the banks due to federal regulations. So there are a lot of things that just removing it from the controlled substance list, we'd see overnight.
Is that something you would like to, like a bill you would like to introduce or fight to get done?
Yeah, I'll propose help write any legislation. We've got the act going through right now, the cannabis and federal government. It's stalled again. Mm-hmm. They were supposed to vote on it at the end of this month. The Senate was, but they pushed it back to August. So it's going to be something that we're going to have to keep doing, in my opinion. Yeah. But that's where I'll come in.
Great.
So when you talk about having your civil liberties affected, threatened, simply by being caught with medical marijuana, could you expand on that a little bit? Now, I do recall from being in California. I lived in California for 6 years when I was stationed out there, and so you would have a lot of these raids where they would go into dispensaries. Now, it was illegal. It was legal there, and the reason they were able to do it was based on the Interstate Commerce Clause, where Congress has the ability to regulate interstate commerce. And so the idea would be somebody from Nevada going to California to a dispensary, buying it, bringing it across state lines, making it technically interstate commerce. And so that's where the DEA was able to, jump in, shut down the dispensary. Now that sounds like it's affecting the businesses themselves. Do you have an opinion on that, or is this more? Are the businesses more threatened, or are the individuals more threatened?
I'd say both parties.
Okay.
Yeah. Even if you're in a state where they have legal, say, adult use cannabis, and then you're crossing state lines to go into another legal state, that still comes under federal jurisdiction because, like you said, the Interstate Commerce Clause, and the feds just need to back away. If they would stop enforcing cannabis infractions, I fully believe that the world isn't going to spontaneously combust. It would free up more money to fight serious crimes with victims.
But even if they remove it from the controlled substances list, I mean, it wouldn't stop the government from creating some sort of regulation, because again, falling under the Interstate Commerce Clause, right? I mean, what's still stopping the DEA from arresting people because they arbitrarily set some sort of limit? I mean, yeah, we can make it legal in the state, but does that necessarily or remove it from the Controlled Substances Act? But if Congress arbitrarily decides to say we're still going to regulate cannabis, can't they do that under the Interstate Commerce Clause?
Basically, you're saying regardless of the scheduling.
Yeah.
Is it still? Yeah. Well, so yeah. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously, if you deschedule it, it opens it up, even for more research. But I guess, like Brian said, I mean, at what point do we need to say, okay, the federal government's authority is this, and the state's authority is this?
long as it's not affecting civil rights, of course, the state should, in my opinion, have pretty free reign to, do whatever they want to, as long as they're not violating rights. But my way of thinking is, if we go ahead and remove it from the scheduling list at the federal level, states aren't gonna, even states that are hesitant to legalize, whether it's medicinal or adult use cannabis, they're not gonna want to miss out on the tax benefits and the economic benefits that brings in. So I think once it's removed from the federal level is something to enforce and something that's bad, you're going to see states go ahead and get in on it.
Yeah, I think that does bring up an interesting point, because you would think that municipalities and counties would sit there and just buy into this and say, well, we're obviously going to reap the monetary benefits here, but it does seem that there are municipalities opting out of it, at least for the state program.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and I think that's at least they have the freedom to do it, at least right now, in Mississippi. And I think that's half the battle, at least making it to where it's even an issue. So what's your thoughts on the is there any place? Okay, so I think we've talked about, well, you're running for Congress, so you wouldn't really have as much opinion on the local level, but is there anything you'd like to see as far as the federal government have any standards at, even if they're saying, okay, you can legalize it, you can do it for medical, recreational, or what have you. Is there anything, in your opinion, that needs to happen as far as, standards, safety, anything such as that?
No, as far as that goes, the government should stay out of it and let the free market do its thing, and it'll take care of itself.
Beautiful.
Can I ask, so as a libertarian, I know that it's often viewed as, well, we're trying to protect individual rights against government. What level of government are we discussing? Because that's often something that I find kind of muddied in the water when it comes to the libertarian position, because it seems that often it's any government involvement. Right. But is there an acceptable level of government intervention as a libertarian?
Well, I know, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I know now the Libertarian Party is interesting in that regard, because their entire structure of the party is very consistent with their ideology. Because Mississippi, correct me if I'm wrong, but Mississippi's Libertarian Party is much more independent than, I guess, their Republican counterparts.
Oh, I would agree. There's structure, but there's less falling in line with this, and this. State affiliates and county affiliates have a lot of freedom to, as long as you fall within the, basic limited government.
So is that kind of how you would, as far as governmental structure, how you think it should be mirrored, as far as basically once you go down, basically having the most autonomy as you go down the line? Is that kind of what you were?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about government, or when I hear the libertarian position on government, it seems to be focused on the federal government, or I would think it would be focused on the federal government, right?
Right.
But because the kind of the fundamental to the right of the aisle perspective of the role of government kind of goes back to the 10th Amendment, and it's left to the states and the people respectively. And so that implies that there is acceptable level of government intervention at the state level and then the people level respectively. And so I'm often curious, like, as a libertarian, because I'm not a libertarian, what level of government are you restricting, and is there an acceptable level of government intervention?
I see.
It varies from libertarian to libertarian, because it's so general, the views. In my opinion, at the federal level, it should be national defense, and that's pretty much
just national defense.
The only role that I see the federal government. Everything could be done better at a more decentralized local level. You won't find many libertarians that want to abolish the government. We would just like to see.
Well, there are some.
I'm speaking for myself, and there are plenty.
Well, there's some Republicans that want to do that too.
But,
sure.
I think the general consensus is what we have now isn't working, and we need to severely limit the scope of the government to restructure things.
Right. Well, so I want to ask about, and I think that actually is my next question will kind of go into that, spending, taxes. Inflation. I guess it depends on which report you're believing, What 8.9% I saw the other day, possibly. We printed like a quarter of all of U.S. currency that have ever existed. We printed like a quarter of it in 2020. So, talk to me about that. I mean, how do you feel about government spending? Do we need to pass a balanced budget amendment or what?
I think we're way past that point. Yeah, we're $30 trillion in debt and going up daily. 8.9% was the most recent inflation estimate for this fiscal year. We're in a bind. We're going to have to severely limit government spending, but at the same time figure something else out because we owe the Federal Reserve Bank more money and interest than physically exists. So we're never going to pay the debt back, and it's just getting more and more out of control. I've got a plan for student debt and to phase out Social Security. I'd like to see those implemented, and that would help slow the strain until we can figure something else out.
Well, tell us about it.
Well, so here's what I got. Social Security's been dipped into. It's not going to be there whenever I'm ready for it. They keep upping the age and upping the amount you have to contribute. I did the math. I'm not very good at it, so it took me a while. I don't have the numbers in front of me.
Yeah.
But I figured out the average amount of contribution into Social Security. I looked at the average amount of student loan debt, and I figured if you agreed to work a certain amount of years contributing into Social Security, then you could opt out, and then your student debt would be eliminated. And, I'd like to see there's something called a Cato 6.2 solution to Social Security. I'd like that or a variation thereof. It essentially turns Social Security into eliminates it, and you go to a Roth IRA type system. So it's good for the individual, but the government doesn't get their cut.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I've got questions.
Okay.
Okay. So if that happens, then your ability to pay for Medicare is based on the performance of the markets.
Right. And I'm solely speaking on Social Security, not and Medicare.
Okay. Sorry.
Medicare, we got to address that as well. But
the Social Security is based on the performance of the markets, and so how do you sell the idea that something that is going to be what was once a fixed income, you're going to get this money, now you're going to get an income? I would imagine the payouts would be relative to the performance of the funds themselves. How do you sell the idea that that's somehow going to be better?
I looked into one of the Scandinavian countries, maybe Sweden. They're a heavily socialized country, and they realized they were running out of money. They were encouraging people to have more babies. There was a period of time where they realized they were going to be in a bind in a generation, and so they moved their retirement system into something market-based, and it's doing pretty well so far. So even Sweden realized that. One of the Scandinavian countries realized that, hey, we're going to be in a bind. The income to distribution ratio wasn't lining up, and so I think if it worked for them, it couldn't be worse than what we have now. Got
it. So do you think that a role in government might be to regulate medicine costs in order to cost of living cost in order to make that money go a little further? Do you think that would be part of a plan like that? Do you know if this Scandinavian country does something like that, like regulate the cost of living?
I don't know. A lot of countries do. Even that Scandinavian country might, but I'm not sure. Whenever you start putting government price caps on things, like even the travel nursing, that came up in Congress recently, to put a cap on that, it levels things out temporarily and short term. It fixes the problem in the short term, but you can only try to regulate the market artificially for so long before it spirals out of control. So I don't support any government capping.
Yeah, price ceilings generally do not work out in the long term. You end up lowering the quality of service for sure. That's a universal truth. Yeah. So
another question I have is, and I think you really kind of touched on it earlier when you said the only role of talking about the national defense and foreign policy, and so obviously the world seems like it's on fire every other day. Ukraine, Russia invaded Ukraine. So tell us about your foreign policy positions and specifically about Russia invading Ukraine.
I'm an isolationist. Whenever I said that the only role of government should be strong national defense, so yeah, I'm a national defense guy as opposed to offense. I don't think we should be the world's police. It makes people mad in other countries, and sometimes we create our own enemies by being up in other people's business. The Ukraine-Russia situation is it's tough. I was watching it, keeping an eye on it a week or two before it actually, things took off. Yeah, I don't have an answer for that. Sanctions aren't working. I know those don't do anything. I knew those weren't going to do anything, even whenever they were being suggested.
Well, sanctions punish people. They don't punish governments. Yeah. It's like any business. Any rising cost is passed on to the consumers.
Yeah, I look at tariffs the same way. I'm not a fan of tariffs. So that's how I looked at the sanctions, but I don't have an answer for that. It's tough, I don't.
So what about import tariffs? Because that would conceivably strengthen American production.
That's the theory, and that's what I've always heard. But I just, take Corona for instance. You have the president of Mexico and say the president of the U.S. get into a little argument, and now we have some tariffs on Corona and to support local beer brewers, but that does. People are still going to buy Corona. It's just punishing it's just a tax, a hidden tax in my opinion.
Right. One of the other issues that we're seeing a lot, and frankly, I think has to do with a lot of how people don't trust government anymore, is corruption. I was watching there's a candidate, I believe his name is Mo Brooks. He's a current congressman. He's running for Senate, and he talked about the other day. He talked about he kind of exposed a scheme, if you will, that congressmen essentially to get committee chairmanships, they have to pay the party, whichever party they are, and it's the lobbyists that foot the bill for them. And so obviously the lobbyists foot the bill, and the congressman gets on the committee assignment, and he'll do whatever the lobbyist says. So that's just one example. And I mean, corruption throughout government is rampant. So what's your thoughts on corruption in general? And do you have any thoughts, or have you seen anything regarding to that specific?
Yeah, and every congressional candidate's going to come in here and tell you, I'm not a politician or whatever. But one thing that sticks out to me is the insider trading. The insider trading clause or the understood agreement that's just one of the benefits of Congress. They know that they're going to use federal tax dollars to put $6 billion into a car company. Well, they all go ahead and invest in the car company before the deal goes, and that's unethical. Shouldn't be gambling with tax dollars. I'd like to see an end to insider trading at Congress and the Senate for immediate family members, as well as the person serving. That shouldn't be a benefit. That's one thing that stuck out to me.
Is that a bill or something you would like to author or see get done?
It is. There was one. It didn't go anywhere. Democrats actually were the ones that proposed it. I'll work with both parties like that one. That's a good idea. I'd sign that or propose one similar.
For sure.
Can we go back to the national defense aspect of it? So I'm kind of curious. So when you said that you're kind of an isolationist, right? In what's called the nuclear triad in the national defense strategy, it's this idea that you have three ways to employ the nuclear arsenal, right? So you have ICBMs, you have plane dropped, launched, and you have submarines, right? So those are able to kind of project out, right? Now, of course, we would say, well, we want those for defense. And so the idea is that we have to invest in that infrastructure and send money to that. And the idea is deterrence, right? So defense and deterrence. And deterrence is expressed in this theory as a multiplication problem. And it is deterrence equals capability times will times perception. And it's expressed that way because the question, there's three questions. Do you have the capability to respond in a nuclear way, right? And the nuclear triad allows that, right? Are you willing to respond, and does the world perceive you as willing, as both capable and willing, right? And so in the absence of any one factor in a multiplication problem, the answer is zero, right? Zero deterrent. So then, is there a case? Would you be somebody in Congress who would make the case that we have to invest and spend more money in defense if we're not going to be a physical force projection force out there going into other countries, intervening in other countries?
We could definitely use a cut, and the Navy's nuclear deterrent always comes to mind. I'm glad you mentioned that. We've got long-range ballistic missile subs in international waters constantly patrolling. Our Navy has, if it was a standalone military force, if our U.S. Navy was its own country, I forget the statistic, we'd have the second or third largest air force in the world just from naval aviators. So we could stay safe while also reducing the defense spending cost, in my opinion.
Okay. And so even when you have countries like China and Russia, are you familiar with what China's doing in the South China Sea?
I am, with the artificial islands.
Yeah, and so the issue with that is
Tell me about that.
So they're actually building islands, and islands that exist, they're forcing people off, and they're establishing runways.
No
they're
shit.
literally building islands. And
Wow.
the problem with that is that it affects the global economy. 80% of the world's trade passes through the South China Sea. And international trade laws say that you have a 200-mile economic inclusion zone where you're able to tax 200
That's right,
200
yeah.
nautical miles from your shore. And so what they're doing is they're creating all these pockets of islands to where
to
200 miles
artificially extend the,
to cover the whole
interesting.
South China Sea. And so
Interesting.
that's a trade issue, and they're well within their legal right once they have these islands established. And so the question is, well, should we then therefore challenge the South China Sea in order to stop them from doing that, because they're going to have the ability to tax or propose tax on 80% of global trade.
I'd look at the whether or not they're in international waters or not, because once they cross into that international waters line, well, I'd say go ahead and work together to dismantle that island.
Well, that's the thing, is that the international water law and the economic inclusion zone are parallel laws. So you can be in international waters, but also be in an economic inclusion zone. Okay. And so that becomes, this question is, okay, how do we deal with that? Because they're legally allowed to do that. So then do we challenge them in the South China Sea?
Yeah, who made this exclusion zone rule? Is that a US
international
federal
treaty?
Okay, I'll take a look at that, see if everybody can come together. And
Right,
I don't know
right.
the bylaws with the international treaty committees, but yeah, that'd be something that would need to be addressed.
Yeah, it's terrifying, honestly.
Yeah, I haven't heard that, but
oh, it's wild, man. If you go look at anybody should go out and look at this artificial island, South China Sea, and you'll see in a matter of a year it goes from them showing like a picture of a ship pumping sand to now a runway. And it's just it's fascinating.
So are they trying
incredibly industrious?
So I mean, I guess theoretically they're just going to keep trying to extend their borders.
Yeah,
that's exactly what
further
they're
and
doing.
further. So I mean, wow, that's amazing.
The entire South China Sea.
That's a very interesting international relations exercise.
Yeah, and of course that's going to pose a threat to Taiwan as well and their economic inclusion zone, with which China's already. They were on a call with Secretary Austin recently and told Secretary Austin that Taiwan is their country, and Secretary Austin neither, basically didn't acknowledge it, but it was very bold because China was willing to say no, that's ours. Mm-hmm. Just so you know, that's ours, and that's kind of the first time that they've done that. Also indicating that they're willing to, on an international playing field, stake claim to Taiwan in a very decisive way.
I've seen YouTube videos where our Navy will go out in a plane. They'll go
fly
out
the
there
boat,
with the sole for the sole reason to just remind China, hey, this is. Then China will come over the radio, hey, you're in Chinese airspace. And they're like, no, we're not. We're in international waters.
Yeah, they're supposed to. So I've done missions like that, and so if you fly within close proximity, you're supposed to carry this card, and whenever you're challenged by the Chinese air traffic control, you're supposed to just read off this card. Based on this law, we're in international waters. We're not flying into your airspace, and they're constantly challenging you,
pushing the limit.
Trying to force you to fly in to put you down on the ground. You guys remember it was the Navy plane some years ago that had an in-flight malfunction, and they were forced to land in China because under international law, an emergency aircraft has right-of-way, and then they had to quickly go out and just sanitize the entire jet because it had a lot of top secret platforms on it. So they had to delete everything.
Oh, wow.
And so the crew, because it was a spy plane, because what they'll do is they'll fly around the borders and listen in with linguists, things of that nature. That's our way of force projection. But then they landed and they held him captive. The Chinese held him captive.
Man.
Yeah, I think it,
I don't remember that.
yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I think now that you say that, I think I do
It was
remember
a P3
some kind of
Orion,
plane
if I'm
landing.
not mistaken. It was a Navy P3 Orion.
Yeah, but I didn't know.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're constantly challenging those borders. You know, during the Cold War, we used to put B-52s with nuclear bombs on them and fly around the border of Russia in international airspace. Constantly having a plane circling around, just as a pop-off
Just
deterrent.
as a flex.
Just in case.
Just as a flex.
Yeah. What do you think about that? I mean, is that something we should be doing?
Really, both countries do it. You'll see videos like, "Oh, Russia buzzed our aircraft carrier," but then also they'll have videos where it's like, "The United States buzzed our aircraft carrier." So
Well,
we both do it.
Well, it's kind of
just poking the bear.
right, but it's also a chicken the egg concept, right? I mean, who did it first, and then as I would think that if the perspective is as an isolationist, surely I would assume at least that you would rather not do that.
Yeah,
But do you see like a necessity to do it if somebody else is challenging us in that way?
Yeah, it's a necessity. If Russia does it to us, we do it to them, and that's, like you said, chicken before the egg. We're still doing that today.
Yeah.
But like our submarine force, I'm all about having a nuclear hidden deterrent, patrolling waters. But I think it becomes a little reactionary, whenever we're doing that to other countries on a daily basis, and
Just like a pissing match. Yeah.
Right, and they may or may not be doing it back to us, but yeah, just no provocation, just for the sake of doing it.
Well, one of my last questions is just about agencies and different departments. So, and specifically with the CDC. So, I actually before I came out here earlier, I was watching Dr. Fauci on TV talking about that he thinks that it's basically, I'll paraphrase that he thinks it's irresponsible for the courts to be deciding public health issues, or at least that was the way he put it. So, what's your thoughts? I mean, obviously with COVID, we saw CDC just running amok and being able to make regulations by decree. Do you believe that that's an overreach?
It is, and it should have never been federally mandated to begin with. It should have always been up to individual businesses whether or not they wanted to, require masks or whether or not they didn't want to require masks. That comes down to a business owner infringement, in my opinion. But leave it up to the business owner. Let the free market. That's usually the answer.
Just as simple as that.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this:
Yeah.
what in your eyes would a libertarian government do in the face of, say, a pandemic like COVID? Because I guess the umbrella of pandemic, it could be something very serious. Like smallpox would be a pretty damn serious pandemic, but something like COVID. In retrospect, what would have been the proper response as a libertarian party?
One thing I noticed that the government was putting too many restrictions on what was a certified COVID test and we ended up sending most of our COVID tests manufactured in the United States to other countries who were buying them, but they weren't good enough to be used here in the U.S. The federal government held up its own self. If they would have just let people develop and, this guy's isn't that good, this guy's is better, this guy's is cheaper, free market again, it would have, the government got too involved and tried to make a dollar out of it, and it held up a lot of progress, in my opinion.
Follow the money.
Yep.
Yeah.
One of the frustrations that I have though is that I'm not willing to believe that like the people working for the CDC are waking up every day and just on the government teat. They're going to have government overreach. Perhaps they have a true belief that what they're trying to do is make sure things are safe for people. Like it's just harder for me to believe that on an individual level, the people actually approving things are just part of this government cancer. And maybe I'm naive in that way, and I'll accept that.
Well, I think from my perspective, and I think this is really kind of an argument for the libertarian position, is that regardless of how pure someone's intentions are, or working in government, just wanting to do right, there's an idea, the basically use it or lose it budgeting, right? So there's an incentive to spend. And there's an incentive almost to justify your existence. Mm-hmm. And I think it's one of those where you're not wrong. And I think that is, honestly, I feel like a lot of, as right of center as I am, that a lot of folks who I'm fighting alongside a lot of times, they kind of have this idea of bashing government employees. And I understand what they're saying to an extent, but again, I think it's more of a product of the system. So how comment on that? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with that. Organizations like the CDC, I don't think they're just waking up every morning like, how am I going to get the American people? But it's the system itself, like he said. Now, I'm not going to say the same thing about the ATF. I think those people do wake up every day. They're trying to get, but yeah, I mean, the average employee, they're just trying to do good, and they just got stuck in the government cog, I guess.
I kind of view it like the VA. Yeah. The VA has a lot of good, hardworking people in there that are working to provide health care to people who are, who served, right? But it just seems like that organization is so dysfunctional, and it seems that I don't even know that there's a political aspect to it, quite frankly, because who has a negative viewpoint of the Veterans Health Administration in terms of what it's there for? The CDC, yeah, I mean, you're limiting and you're keeping us from going out. Who has a negative view of the VA, again, in terms of its utility? Now, there's plenty of negative viewpoints, as somebody who uses the VA, about the service, with the exception of Biloxi. Biloxi seems to be fantastic as far as I can tell. But it just seems that the administration aspect of it is what, as far as I can tell, where the corruption actually exists. Which I would say, like, if that's the case also with these other agencies such as the CDC, then perhaps it isn't the CDC itself. I mean, it might just be the administrators themselves that are.
So do you think we need better administrators, or do you think it's more of a inherent structure of government type of?
I just think there's probably too many layers. Things are getting muddled up here and getting muddled up here, just like NASA. They weren't able to do much. But yeah, they're just so befuddled with government checklists that someone like SpaceX comes in and they're able to get more done. It's not necessarily because they're better, but because there wasn't all that government, paperwork and
bureaucracy
steps.
Itself. So what if it was just like, let's say if each state had its own, well, each state pretty much does have their own CDC. So then would that be a better option then?
It's just ceding everything to the state department?
Yeah, I don't see why, a CDC state leader couldn't talk to other CDC state leaders and figure out
like Dr. Dobbs in Mississippi.
Yeah.
So now that's great as a romantic view of, again, going back to the 10th Amendment, right? It's left to the states and the people respectively. But when you're talking about something that affects the entire nation, how does one reconcile that individual states should be able to make their own decisions on something, but people have the free flow to move from state to state?
Sure.
And then, what if the restrictions in one state are less than another and that state ends up affecting them? Like, how do you reconcile that point?
Yeah, like the freedom to travel. I get what you're saying. If you were restricted from one state to another state.
So if it was no longer at the federal level, and so individual states were able to arbitrarily determine what their, what the recourse for a pandemic would be, how do you make that work?
Yeah, because I remember early on, apparently Florida was turning away people from Texas, I think it was, or somewhere.
Yeah.
I think it was Texas. So is there a place for the federal government there?
That brings up a good point. You do have freedom to travel, so I don't know if it'd be something as simple as the states have to let a couple of corridors open to let people pass through, or I don't know.
Well, can a state limit pick up the random people, like say slow traffic and they're just passing by? Yeah.
I mean, I doubt.
We'll see.
Yeah, I mean, if with it being just kind of in the background, I would hope if it's that one was a little like right, you could hear it.
Yeah.
But I would say the rest of it's probably a
It's
little.
the algorithms, man. Google,
Yeah.
they're going to get you.
What did you
one
see?
way or the
Did you
other.
see where the cops were starting to do that?
Yeah.
You saw that?
Yeah, I had pretty strong feelings against that. It's pretty
Yeah.
Oh, go on. Do tell.
So have
Do
you heard?
tell.
Have you heard this about the cops playing music?
No.
Do you know?
Yeah, they
Explain
know,
it.
They know it'll be copyright infringed on YouTube, and so it's their way of preventing videos from being on YouTube because they know they'll immediately be taken down.
Yeah. So what they'll do is if they and I can't remember. There was a couple incidents specifically that happened. This cop pulled up. There was some kind of domestic or some kind of disturbance. He turned up. It was a specific artist, but and solely to make sure that the people recording, it would hit that algorithm would hit. Isn't that wild?
That is brilliant.
Yeah,
I've got.
it's corrupt, but it's brilliant.
I mean, maybe corrupt. Like it's
on the cops' end though.
It's as corrupt as cops are allowed to lie to you during interrogation, as far as I'm concerned. All right, so I think it's brilliant. I think it's perfect. Like I appreciate things like that. I would.
Let me just say, if that was happening in Ocean Springs when I was mayor, I'd be having a talk with the chief of police. Because I mean, honestly, it's they're figuring out a way to keep people from posting their interactions online.
I would have to put some thought into it.
Yeah.
But
I'm
at
not
first
saying
glance, I'm rather impressed by it.
No, it's impressive.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that. It's A+ for creativity. For sure. So is it so? But I mean criminal justice reform, civil rights. I mean, what's your thoughts on that? Is there anything that the federal government needs to have a say in with law enforcement in that regard?
I don't know. It's hard to say. I want to see an end to civil asset forfeiture. Every time you make a law, whether you have good intentions, sometimes it has bad consequences. So I'd have to look at the
specifics.
Yeah. But yeah, I'd like to see them restricted as much as possible within reason.
Yeah. So what about, property through ill-gotten gains? Let's say a drug dealer, his proceeds from that, and he's able to buy a car, and that gets seized during a drug raid. Is that something that seized and then sold at auction, and then the city gets the money from that?
We've got criminal asset forfeiture and civil asset forfeiture, and a lot of the times the money that's taken and the cars that are acquired, there are no criminal charges associated with those seizures. So, yeah, it's disgusting the amount of money civil asset forfeiture, just taking money off of people without charging them with a crime. It had to be criminal. I'm okay with doing it for criminal asset forfeiture, but just taking it without charging people with a crime is going to stop.
So
excuse me.
A question that comes to mind with that is that, so if we stick to the one aspect of criminal asset forfeiture, the next question I have is, well, at what point are they able to actually liquidate those things? Because, people get appeals. Should we wait to the appeals, or is at the point of conviction, is that when they should do it? And if it is the full appeal process, which, again, if we're talking about civil liberties and people's individual rights and their constitutional rights, then the appeal process is certainly part of it. Well, then it begs the question that, so then municipalities are on the hook to care for and maintain these assets for potentially years, and do they have the infrastructure for that? And I'm sorry, it's long.
No,
I'm just working through a thought here. But if that's the case, then who pays for that?
Yeah. So essentially, and I think that, and sorry to pile on to the question, but yeah, essentially that's kind of that is a big question, because if you make something illegal, I think people still do have rights, due process, all this type of stuff. So there is a place. So I understand what you're saying. Of there needs to be kind of a purgatory while we figure this out.
Yeah.
But at the same point, that's a lot of resources for a government to navigate.
Which becomes a difficult thing to reconcile. So as somebody who puts, as a libertarian, civil rights, individual rights are at the top of the hierarchy, it seems. Then how do we reconcile that? Mm-hmm. Because one thing that I admire about libertarians is their position on the limitations of police, what you can and can't do. And I truly do admire that. It was libertarians who were very much after George Floyd. They were the ones criticizing Derek Chauvin. They were the ones at the same time, the case didn't get a lot of attention, the no-knock warrant that led to Breonna Taylor's death. I admire that about them. Well, what is the limitation here? Do we inflate the government enough to compensate the government so that they can care for those assets until they're fully convicted, the appeal process is over, or not?
Yeah, I don't think charging somebody with a crime even is enough to, because you're innocent until proven guilty. So why have your assets seized, even if it's criminal asset forfeiture until you've been convicted? So,
I mean, your appeal process can take 10 or 15 years. So do you hold on to a car for 10 or 15 years?
no, I don't even think they should take it until they've been convicted of a crime. I don't have an issue with most criminal asset forfeiture and all civil asset forfeiture. It's whether than trying to decide what the limits are. I think it'd be better just to get rid of seizing assets like that and incentivize policing.
What do you mean by that? Sorry.
You'll see the cars driving around seized by
your
local.
Right.
It'll be a Camaro or be a.
It's a weird flex, man.
It'll be a Mustang.
Yeah. That sign says, "Guess what? We can give you a ticket and take your shit too."
Yeah.
That's what that sign says.
And they make it seem like those were all criminal asset forfeiture, but a lot of those are civil asset forfeiture. So if a cop wants a new car, who's to say I'm gonna seize this guy's assets so he can be driving around in a Mustang?
Well, and the problem with that is that it creates the incentive. Like that's something I think that both people on the right and left of the aisle will be happy to support because it alleviates budget constraint. And Republicans like that because they get to lower the budget. People on the left like that because they can reallocate budget.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course that puts the police in the position to say, well, let's arrest these people so we can sell off their.
Yeah.
I don't think they do that at the individual level.
Yeah.
But the incentive is certainly there.
For sure. Well, there's always bad actors. So I mean, just like you're always going to have bad actors in every profession.
I want to say the Richland Police Department built their entire law enforcement complex with civil asset forfeiture money.
Wow.
So it gives incentives like that
Yeah.
maybe
It's the incentives that we don't want to talk about.
right. It's like, well, maybe we will turn a blind eye to get this offender when before they'd just be like, hey, don't do that anymore. Just be a stern warning. So just incentivize giving people a criminal record to get monetary gain for the department or possibly yourself if you're the person that gets to drive that new car.
So let me ask you this. This is a joke, but I'm actually kind of curious how you answer it. Do you vote yes or no on your own pay raise as a libertarian?
Oh, and the
That sounds like an existential crisis, right?
talking about the
Because if you vote yes, you get more money, but you also increase government costs.
right. No, if it was in the U.S. House, I wouldn't. I know they do.
Oh no, I mean as a firefighter.
Oh yeah, I just that's a city council.
You don't even have to cross that bridge.
You have to cross the bridge. Yeah, it's funny how many libertarians actually work for the government. I think
It's ironic, isn't it?
It's ironic.
Well, but in Mississippi, it's unfortunately. I mean, the number one job provider in this state is a government job.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I'd be surprised if that isn't the case
in most places,
in most states.
it likely is, but it does show how ironic it is that in Mississippi we're limited government. No less government, more freedom, and
Yep.
Yeah, but ironically, they also take the most federal government or most federal funding out of any other state, and yet they're arguably the most right-leaning state in the nation.
ironic.
Yeah.
Interesting.
It is interesting.
So, well, Alden, thank you for coming out and talking to us. So tell us a little bit more, just kind of wrap it up. Where can they find you? The primary is when?
Nominations already happened. I'll be on the general election ballot.
That's right. Yes. I'm what am I thinking? This is not.
That's okay.
Yeah. I'm so used to Republicans and Democrats. Well, that's part of why we're doing this, right?
Yeah, right.
That's part of why we're doing this, is to let everybody know that this is an important election and there's a lot of options together. So I'm sorry.
I appreciate that. Thank you all. I'm honored to be out here. I'm most active on Facebook. That's Alden Johnson for Congress. And my website's aldenforcongress.com. You can either type FOR or the number 4.
Okay.
So, yeah, I appreciate y'all having me out here. It's been an honor.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been an absolute blast, man. So thank you for running. Thank you for putting your money where your mouth is. You know, a lot of people talk, you know, big things about government. You ran for mayor. You're running for Congress. I mean, that's a very admirable thing to do, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Jim.